1989 Dawn of Freedom by GMT Games. This is a political card-driven game in the tradition of Twilight Struggle or Labyrinth: The War on Terror. It is a two-player game that covers the fall of communism in Eastern Europe in 1989. A player will represent the democratic powers at work to weaken the grip of communism in Eastern Europe, and that a player will represent the communist powers that are trying to retain control of the area. There are a lot of things that I want to say about this game, so let's keep this introduction short and let's jump right in to see how the game works. This is the very nice looking mounted map. It represents 6 countries of Eastern Europe. Here you have Eastern Germany, then Poland, Czechoslovakia, Hungary, Romania and Bulgaria, and each country is identified by boxes of a different color. Those boxes represent geographical as well as social, political and economic entities. For example, writers, university students, workers. The limo represents the elite. You have the church, farmers, and as you can see, there are connections that connect the boxes to indicate how certain groups can influence other groups. For example, the writers are connected only to the students, they only influence the students, and vice versa. You can influence the writers only through the university. These farmers here connected only to these other farmers. The students here have connections with the bureaucrats of the state that clearly are connected to many other places. So just you will see on the map different patterns and ways in which different groups may be connected to other groups. Each area also has 2 boxes, one to the right where the communist player places his support markers and one on the left where the democratic player places his support markers. Each area also has a stability number printed in the top right corner, 2, 4, 5. That number indicates the number of support points that you must have in an area more than the opponent in order to control that area. For example, in this elite area here, the communist player has 1 point that is not 4 more than the opponent does. The opponent has 0, so nobody has control of that area. But if later the communist player adds support points to that area until he has 4 and the opponent has 0 in that area, then he has 4 points more than the opponent, he takes control of the area, and then the support marker is flipped to its colored side. Actually, each support marker has 2 sides precisely, so that it can be flipped back and forth to indicate when control is gained or maybe lost when the opponent plays support markers in that area, so that one of the 2 sides does not have the required advantage over the other side. The game comes with 3 decks of event cards, one used in the early phase of the game, the early year cards, then you have the middle year cards that are shuffled in the main deck in turn 4, and then in turn 8 you add the late year cards. Most of the cards in the deck are of the type that you see here, with a star printed on the top right corner of the card and then an event printed at the bottom of the card. The number here indicates the operational value of the card, and the color of the background of the star indicates the alignment of the card. You have democratic cards, communist cards and neutral cards. At the beginning of the game you receive 8 cards, and then players alternate playing cards during 7 action rounds. There are 7 action rounds each turn, so unless there are card effects that modify the number of cards that you have in your hand, at the end of a turn you should have a card left in your hand for next turn. At the beginning of the following turn you receive as many cards as you need to go back to a hand of 8, and then you repeat the procedure. Each turn you have 7 action rounds during which players play cards and resolve the effect. Cards belonging to your alignment can be used for their operational value or for the event. You can choose. I'm the democratic player, I can choose to play this card to use 3 operational points or to activate the event. Cards belonging to the opponent are more problematic because you can only play them for the operational value, but the event still happens. So cards of the opponent will have both aspects of the card taking place. At least as you play the card, you can choose if you want to activate the event first and then use your points, or the other way around. Some events have an asterisk here. That means that once the event takes place, the card is removed from the game. The event may only happen once. Other cards, once the event happens, simply go to the discard pile and will be shuffled back in. Also, certain events require the previous play of other events for that event to take place, so events must be chained in a specific way. At least some of them. And well, the events are pretty self-explanatory. Once you get to know the cards, you know what the events are and what the events can do, and clearly getting to know these events and figuring out a way to use them to your advantage is a huge part of the game. It is really the core of the game. There's no way for me now to even cover the main events and give you a sense of how these events work. I will leave it to you, well, also because discovering what the events can do and what the best way to use them is clearly is a big part of the game, is part of what makes the game fun. There's also another type of card, which is the scoring card. These cards are much rarer. There's only one for each country in the game. When you get one of these cards in your hand at the beginning of the game, you cannot keep it to the next turn. You have to play it at some point during this turn, so the scoring will happen the turn in which you receive the card in your hand. But I will explain later how scoring countries and playing scoring cards works. When a card is played for its event, then you simply follow the instructions printed on the card. They are self-explanatory, but when you're playing a card for its operational value, the card can be used for one of three things. So you can spend all of your points to do one of three things. One thing that you can do is to roll on the Tiananmen Square track. This is the only time where you can play a card without activating the effect of the opponent. And this is really what the score is for. It is a safety valve. If the effect of the card that you have in your hand is too damaging and it's an effect of the opponent, so it will take place when you play the card, then you can get rid of that by playing it on the Tiananmen Square track. And you can do that once per turn. And you may get some benefits, but the benefits are not nearly as good as those that you would receive if you played these operational points on the map. So this is really what the square is for. The Tiananmen Square is so that you can reduce the damage from effects coming from the opponent's cards. When you play a card on this track, you roll 1d6. You add the operational value of the card. If the total is equal to or higher than the number in the next box of the Tiananmen Square track, then you can advance your counter in that box. The players start with that counters on the left of the Tiananmen Square track. And when you are the first player to reach a certain band on the square, you receive the benefit printed on that band. And some effects are long-lasting, and you retain the benefit of that effect for as long as you are the only player that has reached that area. When the other player reaches that same area, then you lose that effect. So only the first player to reach a certain area benefits from that effect. The opponent only gets to annul that effect by reaching that area. And some effects simply are a one-time use. You can spend the operation points on a card to add points to areas where you already have a presence, and if you gain the required advantage, you can take control of that area. You can also add points to areas adjacent to areas where you had a presence before you started placing points. That means that you cannot chain support points. It usually costs an operation point for each support point that you add, unless you're adding points to areas controlled by the opponent. In that case, it takes 2 operation points to add a single support point, but in that way you may also be able to make a control area uncontrolled. You can also use a card to execute 2 power checks. Power checks are high reward actions that, however, are also risky. May give you a lot, may give you nothing. To execute a power check, you roll a die, you add the operation value of the card that you have used. You have +1 for each area that you control that is adjacent to the area where you are executing the support check. Suppose I am a Democratic player, I'm checking the communist support there, then I have +2 because I have 2 controlled areas adjacent, but then I have -1 for each adjacent area controlled by the opponent, so I have -1 there. 4 and 4, 8, 10 minus 1 is 9. What I'm trying to do is to beat twice the value of the stability number in that area. So in that area, I'm trying to beat 6. And I get to reduce the support of the opponent by the difference between the total that I put together and twice the stability value. When a scoring card is played, you interrupt the game to resolve a power struggle in the corresponding country. And you resolve power struggles by playing a real mini game, a game within the game that is played using this deck of cards here. And, well, I will not explain how the mini game works now because I think otherwise this review would be way too long. I will make a separate video in case you want to know the details about the mini game. But for now, suffice to say that the number and type of areas that you control in a country increases your chances of winning the power struggle mini game, which is really why you have been trying to take control of areas and to steal control from your opponent, because you need to win the power struggles when they come up. The winner of the power struggle minigame rolls on this column, and this will indicate the number of support points that the opponent loses in that country. The number can be modified. This is why it can go above 6. Then the winner also rolls on this at a table, and that indicates the number of victory points that the winner will gain. Then also the country is scored following indications on this table, and again the number and type of areas controlled in the country may give a player presence or domination or control. There are different amounts of points to be gained. Also certain particularly profitable areas in each country are called battlegrounds, and there is an extra point to be gained for each area that the players controlled. Not only that, if the Democrat player was the winner of the struggle and he rolls a modified 4 or more on this table, then he achieves a P result. That means that he takes power in the country. The communist government is gone. And in that case, the scoring card for that card is removed from the game. It does not go in the discard pile. The country is now a democratic country. The communists are still there, but now they are the opposition, and the country will not be checked again during the game. If the communists survive, meaning they are still in power after the power struggle, then the communist player gets to score points. And the points scored in each country increase on each time that the country is checked and the communists remain in power. So all that the communist player is trying to do is to remain in power, to leave things as they are at the beginning of the game. Victory points are recorded on this track here. Communist points are subtracted from the total, and democratic points are added to the total. If during the game the total goes to +20, then the democratic player wins the game immediately. -20, the communist player wins the game immediately. Otherwise, the game may continue until this card in the late your deck is played. This card also can end the game, and there is a procedure to score in that case. If neither of those conditions apply, then the game is over at the end of turn 10. At that point, you score each country once more following standard scoring procedures, and also the communist player will receive bonus points for the number of countries that still are communist at the end of the year. Of course, the higher the number of countries, the higher the number of points scored then. You total the points that the two players have scored, and of course that at the end will tell you who the winner is. This is a wonderful game, a game that I've been enjoying immensely. I love the balance between the theme and the mechanics. The two of them just go together so well here. I feel that the mechanics are intriguing, are exciting, are full of depth that develops game after game, and yet at the same time, the card-driven mechanics here still manages to capture the theme. And I really like how there are indeed levels of depth to be discovered game after game. Of course, you have to figure out how the connections between areas work, and then you also see how, interestingly, they mirror political and economic and social realities. Of course, you have to learn about the cards. The first time you play the game, they're just events that are going to hit you and you have no way of foreseeing them. And then as you play the game more and more, you see how the cards interact, what the cards can do, what are the ways in which you can minimize certain negative effects and optimize the use of other cards. Speaking about the mechanics, I love the fact that you're forced to score certain countries in a certain turn. If you have a restriction, and when you're playing historical games, you should have restrictions. Historical games should force you to act within a range of possibilities that is determined by what happened historically, but at the same time, these restrictions are not such that they will force you to face utter chaos. If you receive a card, a scoring card at the beginning of your turn, you still have potentially several cards that you can play to invest in that country before the country scored, in case that is a country in which you do not have power enough. But at the same time, there's an interesting thing. The opponent may start noticing that all of a sudden you increase your activities in a certain country that you have been neglecting. What's going on there? And the opponent, it's almost as if the game simulates a certain level of intelligence. There is the intelligence working behind the political system. All of a sudden you start noticing that an increased level of activity in a certain area may mean something. And of course, there are other ways in which you can disguise that. You can play certain cards in certain areas, pretending that you're forced by the mechanics and the effects. I really cannot do anything but playing it this way. But in reality, you are building up strength before scoring happens, a scoring that you have in your hand and know will hit very soon. There are times in which you're almost at the bottom of the deck. Poland hasn't scored yet. It will happen soon. Other times, you have to invest broadly because you really do not know what country's coming up next. So this is really a game that has a lot to offer. Yes, you have to play it quite a good amount of times to really grasp all that the game has to offer. But one good thing is that you do not have to play the initial games just based on fate. It's not like, oh, the game is done now, but I think it'll get better later. Because as you start playing it, you can glimpse of all the things that you can do. It's almost like a puzzle that you want to play more and more to discover the further layers that you feel are there, and they're just there for you to figure out. And as your understanding of the design increases from game to game, I actually found that intellectual discovery to be part of the pleasure associated with this game. This is a game that I have enjoyed a lot, a game that I will certainly keep playing and exploring in the future. I just can't wait to play it more. Now a Vassal module has been released, and I'm also going to start several online games just because this is a game of which I cannot have enough. A game that I highly recommend, and as of now, early May 2012, definitely the best game that I played this year.